Hello and welcome to day 4 at SEEDIG 6. We have the honor of launching this day with our session on privacy and data protection in C++ during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Mary Bagdasaryan. I am a human rights attorney from Armenia and currently an LLM candidate at the University of Pennsylvania Law School in the United States. And today I have the pleasure of co-moderating this session with Ceren Unal, who is the Regional Policy Manager for Europe at the Internet Society. As the session title suggests, this session will have a particular focus on safeguarding privacy in crisis situations, specifically in the context of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And we are delighted to have with us our distinguished contributors, namely Olga Kyryliuk, who is the CEO and founder of the Influencer Platform, Pavlina Itelson, who is the Senior Program Officer for Diplo USA, and Sophie Kwasny, who is the head of Data Protection Unit at the Council of Europe. And before we turn to our contributors, a few logistics. As any session at SEEDIG, this session is also meant to be very interactive. So we kindly ask you to engage in the discussion with your questions and comments. You can type them either in the chat, or we would very much appreciate it if you can just raise your Zoom hand and ask your question yourself. When speaking, we would appreciate it if you could use your camera to make the interaction more friendly and lively. If you have joined us through social media live stream, you can post your comments and questions in the chat, and our social media moderator will let us know about those, and we will do our best to incorporate them in our discussion. If you want to post anything on social media during the session, please use the hashtag SEEDIG6. And now I would like to turn to my co-moderator, Ceren, to introduce our first contributor.
Hi. Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. I hope everybody is fine, well, healthy. This is going to be a very interesting session for sure. So without further ado, I would like to turn to Olga. And Olga, you have been leading the intersessional project on mobile tracking apps. And we would like to hear your initial results.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mary. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I want to start actually when I was thinking about this session. I recalled how we were preparing for the SEEDIG 6 still, and when the corona crisis happened, and then we were discussing how should we adjust our agenda so that we don't really turn the whole program into the World Health Organization conference. But to be honest, I'm really happy that today we have this session, that we have the opportunity to talk about this specific balance between public health on one hand and privacy and data protection on the other hand. And on this, I also want to express the sincerest gratitude to our working group, which has been working with us during this project, but I will come back to this a little bit later. I just also want to say that I believe it is very important to look at this situation in a whole complexity, because the COVID-19 has not only raised the health concerns, but it actually became a worldwide historic experiment about how our constitutional culture would adjust to our digital future. And what is interesting that this digital future actually happened overnight, and I really doubt that any of us was ready that something which we were talking as about our distant or not so distant future actually happened once we woke up in the morning and we got to know that we have to work from home, so we have to deal with this enormous health crisis. We have somehow to take care of our life, and that when you have the choice between protecting your health and between caring about sharing or not sharing about your personal data, this is not that much a choice. Of course, each of us as a human being would select to follow the measures which are proposed to us by the governments, but to do everything possible just to protect our lives and the lives of our loved ones. And we saw that in our region also there was some certain some level of similarity in the response of the governments to this COVID-19 crisis. And what we observed that many countries started using mobile tracking apps. And with the growing number of these apps, we at SEEDIG decided that as long as there are many of these apps tracking us, we should also take some actions, some measures to keep track of these apps. This is how was born this idea of this, and I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say of the very first thematic intersessional project at SEEDIG, which was specifically dedicated to tracking apps and privacy issues. And it all started from the open call for the working group members, and once this working group was formed, we also had the online consultation with the community. We tried to understand and to map the situation of what is happening in different countries. Then also the working group conducted its own research about what are the practices in different countries, and actually we understood that the human rights implications are very much similar in different countries, and that's why we decided to address some set of recommendations to other stakeholders. But then again, we had to face the issue of who is our target audience, whom we want to address with our suggestions. And after some deliberations, we decided that we want to talk to governments, we want to talk to public health authorities, and we also want to address developers, as because they are also the ones who are designing these tracking apps, and usually at the request of the governments. That's why the recommendations which we have produced, they are addressed to these two target audiences, but they are targeting governments and developers inside our region, but also just because these tracking apps are usually very much the same. These recommendations can be applied in all other countries, and we would be very happy to share our experiences. And once I finish, I will also post to the chat the link to our webpage of the intersessional project, and there you can also find the text of the recommendations. I would not stop now specifically on what we are recommending, but in general, we are trying to encourage the policymakers and the developers to be more conscious about human rights, and to try to observe the principle of using human rights by default when they are creating the policies or when they are designing the tracking apps to try to stop the dissemination of coronavirus. So I think I will stop at this point, and then we can discuss more details later.
Thank you very much, Olga. I'm sure we will get back to specific recommendations during the discussion. And now I would like to give the floor to Pavlina Itelson, who actually led Diplo Foundation's research on tracking apps, to share some reflections on their project and its results. Pavlina, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to build up on what Olga said a little bit and frame it in a wider concept, and briefly speak about the effectiveness of contact tracing apps. Let me start with the observation that while the COVID pandemic is global, the responses and measures to contain the spread of the virus are on the national level. So when the first measures to fight the pandemic were taken in the beginning of 2020, and contact tracing apps were introduced, Diplo started to map which countries have contact tracing apps. If you could, so on the map, you can see the contact tracing apps worldwide are very fragmented, but not only geographically, but according to the types, amounts of data collected, and their implementation. However, there are also commonalities across the globe. So I would like to highlight several of them. Thank you for the map. First and foremost, it is important to say that contact tracing, including contact tracing apps, is just one part of measures to tackle the pandemic. Without a proper public health plan, testing, and guidance from the state health authorities on how to behave, contact tracing apps would not be effective. Another aspect of effectiveness is the actual use of the apps by the population. Mobile signal coverage, types of devices people use, or digital literacy need to be considered when launching a contact tracing app. However, the most important is the trust of the users. They are the ones who need to use the app, download it, and share their sensitive health information. The concepts of privacy, ethics, and trust, which are vital to the implementation of these apps, are strongly linked to individual cultures. Users' trust is directly linked to the methods, types, and amounts of data collected by the apps and how this data is used by the authorities. One of the issues is, of course, the possibility of misuse of the collected data against individuals or groups by breaching their privacy, limiting their right to assemble or right to free speech. This means that if the public health authority wants to have the contact tracing app to be widely adopted and have reliable data on how the virus spreads, it has to provide for adequate protection of collected personal data and inform the users that it is doing so. So within the national frameworks, such personal data collection must be in accordance with the law, limited in scope, in purpose and time, and anonymized data, just to name a few principles. With opening of national borders and increased travel, the question of interoperability of contact tracing apps comes into play, facilitating tracing of cross-border infection chains, which is particularly valuable for cross-border workers, for tourism, business trips, and not to mention personal relations of families scattered around the world. In international setting, the interoperability of apps and cross-border personal data protection are the main issues for the effectiveness of this approach. And given the time, I'm going to stop here, but as you see, we did quite a mapping, so we have a lot of information. I'm very happy to answer any questions, give more information, and I hope we'll have a wonderful session covering this very wide and multifaceted topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulina. This all shows how important trust and collaboration, as in all other topics that we do. Now I'd like to turn to Sophie. And so following up on these two very interesting research projects, we would like to hear the Council of Europe's perspective on how to protect privacy in this mad times of COVID.
Okay, I think everyone can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon. Hello from Strasbourg. First of all, thanks to SEEDIG for organizing in those circumstances a great conference and with great engagement. So thank you to the team and thank you to Mary, Sharon and the co-panelists Olga and Pavlina for the discussion. So from a Council of Europe perspective on the crisis and the measures that have been taken, we have had a lot of work because rightly so, all our governments, and I speak about our 47 member states, so quite a number already of the countries engaged in SEEDIG 6, but much broader than that. All those countries and countries of other regions we are working with in the field of data protection have been responding to similar challenges, the main priority of all of them being to save lives, protect their population. And right at the beginning of the crisis, the Council of Europe very clearly established that this was an absolute priority, but that the responses had to be given in full compliance of the values that our societies have always been defending and promoting. And so we have recalled that the crisis was actually a unique opportunity for our democratic societies to reaffirm our values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And in particular, regarding data protection, I want to highlight that a number of countries have taken emergency measures at a very high level. 9 of our 47 member states have actually used one of the articles of the European Convention on Human Rights, which allows to temporarily declare derogation to some of the articles of the convention, including the right to privacy. And so I'll mention those 9 countries because you will see that some are of the region. Albania, Armenia, Estonia, Georgia, Latvia, North Macedonia, Romania, San Marino, and Serbia. So those countries declared for a limited period of time that they were making use of Article 15 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And what I want to highlight is that while exceptional measures in this exceptional crisis and circumstances were necessary, data protection experts have unanimously and commonly voiced the fact that the right to data protection has always been built apprehending and conciliating other interests. And so in the data protection regimes, highlighting that the right to data protection is not an absolute right, there has always been possibilities to limit the rights and bring derogations. And this is framed, of course, very strictly. So you need, and it's been said, you need a law. It needs to be necessary and proportionate in a democratic society for particular grounds, for particular purposes. And public interest, and in particular health, public health, is one of those grounds on which you can come and restrict some of the rights, but you don't need to bring constitutional level exceptional measures or state of emergency in your country. You can do it at a lower level. Regarding the crisis, here we focus on some of the apps and contact tracing, but we've seen it, we've all moved online. Our lives have moved online, our work, our teaching, our exchanges. So you can imagine the number of data protection implications that has had in the field of employment, in the field of schooling. So we have been very busy. And so the chair of the Committee of Convention 108, which is our treaty on data protection that gathers 55 countries, so also in Africa and Latin America, so quite a big scope of outreach. The chair of the committee and the data protection commissioner already in March recalled the key data protection principles, the fact that this right is inherently and by essence to be reconciled with other legitimate grounds. And so they recalled what was applying in those circumstances and in the particular cases, and highlighting, of course, that when you're dealing with health data, it is sensitive data and you need a reinforced protection. And their main message was that, of course, the data protection is not an obstacle to saving lives. And then in a second joint statement, they've dwelled really into the topic of contact tracing, and that was end of April, because we saw, and it's been highlighted by other speakers before me, basically all countries have reacted the same manner and tried to provide technical tools. All the points that Pavlina has mentioned that came out of their study are exactly the points that we've been highlighting in the second joint statement on contact tracing. But the main one I want to come back, and Pavlina stressed it, is the effectiveness. I mean, we don't have enough evidence, enough time of analysis of the effect to use such technologies, such intrusive technologies, without having assurances of the use, especially knowing that you need quite highly level of adoption by the population for this mechanism to be effective. So I invite you to go to our joint statement, but there you find all the aspects on trust, on transparency, on voluntariness, on time limitation. I will not mention them again, but basically we've had a lot of work and we continue to have some, but we're very happy to recall the data protection principles that apply in that context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thank you very much, Olga and Pavlina, for your initial contributions. I would like to turn to the question of trust, because as it was mentioned by our contributors, without trust, these applications will simply not be used and these emergency measures would not have been effective at all. So I would like to ask Pavlina, what do you think, what could the governments have done to build more trust? On the one hand, of course, they were under time constraints and as Olga mentioned, everything happened almost overnight, but on the other hand, what they should have done to build more trust and maybe also offer more safeguards. And also our other contributors, if you have any thoughts, you're also welcome to contribute. So Pavlina, if you
one of the essential parts of building trust for the users to use the apps were transparent privacy policies and education, basically public education about the necessity of contact tracing. With that goes, of course, digital literacy. Like with any technological advancements, digital literacy needs to be taken into account when speaking to the public. Meaning, if we design an app which has, by design, a good privacy protection, but the general public is unable to understand that, it is a problem, it will not be adopted. So generally, I would say for those governments who were designing the apps, they should have had, and they did sometimes, consider privacy as part of the design of the app, and then actually very wide public campaign to use the apps was always helpful. Now, trust in using contact tracing apps also goes hand in hand with trust of the, as I mentioned, of all the public health measures. So if the trust into the what government does related to public health measures to fight the pandemic is not there, there will be no trust either in the contact tracing apps. It is a tricky way to do it, but I believe some of the countries managed it. For example, Finland and Germany have a very high adoption rate, and also giving the users the choice to participate in the app and to have control over what data is shared is also important. So, but I'll stop here. Thank you.
Mary, can we also complement Pavlina's point? Yes. Clearly, trust is essential, and there were several concrete manners in which it could be achieved. It's been highlighted in the development phase of the digital solutions that were being used. Broad involvement, multi-stakeholder involvement of civil society representatives, I think, was fundamental. So already a transparency from the start. Clearly, with the very high privacy by design integration and engineering of the tools, because then in the technical structure of the tools, you had plenty of things you could do that were going to reduce the level of invasion on our right. And so some countries we've seen have published the data protection impact assessments they've been carrying out. So that's good for transparency. Some have published the code, so open source access, and that's also highly recommended. And then on the notion of trust and how clearly this is linked to the adoption level of the whole mechanism, the fact that in data protection, you need a legal basis for the processing. You can rely on consent, but when you rely on consent has to respond to a number of criteria to be valid. And one of the criteria is to be free, to freely be able to express your consent. And from our perspective, we consider that with the social pressure around the use of the app, the consent would not necessarily be free. So we've invited countries to have laws, enact laws that would say, okay, we're going to use this app and it will be on a voluntary basis. That is, that still the person needs to download it. But the basis for the processing of data there is not the consent, because you might, as we've seen, a number of people have felt pressured to use those apps. But so yes, once again, I need to highlight that transparency was absolutely key to the scheme. And there are countries where we've seen glitches on, if I take the French example, for instance, of the data protection authority that has been involved and that has issued an opinion, and actually found some months after that the exact definition of the types of data that were being collected were not what was actually working. So that's really not ideal to build and preserve the trust of the population.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add a few words. So first, I really totally agree with what Sophie and Pavlina have already mentioned, but also I think another problem of trust is that some people do not have trust to anything that the governments are issuing. This might be another challenge because they by default think that if this is coming from the government, then this is for the surveillance, for the monitoring purposes, and they just have some inner resistance to that directly. But for that, yes, I agree that additionally to digital education and awareness raising, it is also very important to probably have some kind of let's say periodic reporting to the public from the public health authorities or from the governments, informing us as the citizens, as the individuals of what have been the efficiency levels of using these tracking apps, what results they have gave, what have been the implications, and whether it makes sense to continue using them. Because if we introduce this digital solution, but at the end we don't see how this is helping in practice to combat the spread of the virus, then it would be very difficult for ordinary citizens to actually accept that and take that into their private lives. That's why I would say it's very important to have this two-way communication between governments and us as the individuals who are supposed to use these apps. But also, it was very fairly mentioned that there have to be the alternatives. If the government is launching the tracking app, then it has to be indeed voluntary, and the people who are not willing to use this app, they should have the alternative, which would be, let's say, more privacy friendly, but which would help to achieve the same result if possible.
Thank you very much, Olga. At this point, as the discussion is heating up, I would like to turn to our social media moderator, Anna. I believe we have a question.
Yes, there are two questions. One is from Tony. I hope I am pronouncing this name right, and I apologize in advance. Tony Pustinen. This question is mainly to Sophie. Do you know what kind of implications Krems versus Facebook decision will have on the schools' use of G Suite or Microsoft services in education in the EU? And the other question is from Bogdan Manic. Can you name a good practice example of the existing apps that follows all the proclaimed standards and is adopted by the population? To which Tony replied that he hasn't looked into the Finnish contact tracing apps himself, but he understands that both client and the server are open sourced, and there is a cybersecurity expert who made positive comments about it. So these are the things going on in the chat right now, and I will leave the floor to responses.
Thank you very much, Anna. Then I would like to follow up on Bogdan's question first to Paulina. I believe you already mentioned Germany and Finland as good examples of best practices. Would you like to elaborate on that by other examples, maybe?
Yes, those are the two highlights. There are a lot of examples how not to do it, but Germany and Finland are the ones who managed to do it. Well, part of it was not rushing the apps. Part of it was doing the homework, preparing them, developing them, as Sophie said, within the multi-stakeholder involvement, having the input of civil society, and being decentralized, being based on Bluetooth proximity tracing, where the data is stored on the device. It's not stored on the server in both cases, both countries did a very thorough impact assessment of these apps. In case of Finland, it's very interesting that also the doctors are involved. So in case you need to put in that the person is infected with COVID-19, there is a whole other side of the contact tracing apps on the health side, giving you, for example, a PIN number to put in so it cannot be misused, and making sure that the PIN numbers are used properly. I do not know, I know there was a question about the adoption rate in Finland. I do not know, I know about 2 million people downloaded it on the first day, that I know. But other than that, as far as percentage, I do not know. But I would like to also probably talk a little bit about the app used in Singapore, which is one of the first ones, and it was used as in 2015 for MERS-2, so not even for COVID-19. They do have experience, South Korea and Singapore, with contact tracing previously. However, none of these apps, either previously used for MERS tracking or for COVID-19 tracking, were evaluated for effectivity. As far as evaluation, post-evaluation with the MERS cases in Singapore and South Korea, only a complete set of healthcare impact on the limiting the spread of the virus was done. So that was evaluated as positive, but not the contact tracing apps themselves. So that is something to look into, I believe, once we're done with this, to what level the design and adoption of these high rates, like in Finland and Germany, does have an effect in the total effort to stop spread of the virus.
Thanks a lot, Paulina. Very informative. And yes, we're still in the very, not early beginning, but still in the beginning phase of the learning curve of how these things work. Thanks a lot. So now I would like to turn to Sophie again, and I would like to ask a more forward-looking question. Olga mentioned the distrust of people in the governments, and Paulina mentioned we already have many bad practice examples when it comes to contact tracing. And there's a lot of anxiety in the public around the world, and including the European region and the Southeast European region as well, that these temporary measures are here to stay. So how can we make sure that this doesn't happen and we have the appropriate safeguards? And of course, Council of Europe is a huge resource on that. So I would like to hear your perspective, and also linking it to Tony's question. Do you see an implication of the Schrems II decision in the near future for COVID-related data transfers as well? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Ceren. So your question about the limited duration of those exceptional measures, because indeed they came as exceptional responses to an exceptional context, and we see that the measures are lasting. We have recommended that when establishing by law those measures, that they be integrated in the mechanism some sunset clauses with very clear provisions about the fate of the data that were collected in that context, with absolute deletion. So this is something that we have recommended, and then the role of the supervisory authorities, the data protection authorities, is really also crucial in that context, because whether you trust or not your government, in our countries we have independent data protection authorities that are there to say what might not please our governments. and they have a role not only, you know, of giving a green light when it's launched, but to continue to audit the functioning and the application of those measures. So that's also, I think, a very important safeguard. And clearly, we can trust our data protection authorities to react if there are some abuses of the measures that were implemented. And then regarding Tony's question, which is much broader, which is the question actually of transborder data flows and the Schrems II decision, which specifically concerns EU member states exporting data to the US. You referred to Microsoft, but it's actually valid for any service providers or communication platforms based in the US, because it's applicable to all of our digital communications. And there we see with the decision of the European Court of Justice that the bilateral agreement between the EU and the US has been invalidated. That's what's called the Privacy Shield. So now all the firms that are operating in that context need to find solutions. So we've seen that standard contractual clauses that are really contracts that are negotiated haven't been invalidated, but that on top of those standard contractual clauses, you need supplementary guarantees. And the data protection authorities of the EU are now really working on that and trying to find how to guide those firms in allowing the transfer of our personal data to the US in a manner which is safe. And so, I mean, encryption is one of the measures that has been put forward, but there are still no results. So it's still too early to tell what the full effects of the Schrems II decision will be. But I mean, I think it's a serious situation for all of us, and not only actually in respect of the US, although it's clearly one of the main geographic source of the processing of our personal data. But we've seen now the problem with TikTok and applications from other regions of the world. The problem is exactly the same. We need to be assured that our personal data has the same level of protection and is not accessed unduly by government authorities when they flow outside Europe. And that's what our convention is there for. So the more countries succeed, the more protection we will have, and we're working on that.
May I just add to Sophie's a little bit with the Schrems II decision and actually a wider perspective outside of EU, also about cross-country data transfers. Any country basically which uses centralized contact tracing apps and stores it on a server puts in an additional layer of worries on itself, because that server is sometimes run, and that was the case in Australia, by an American company. Australia's centralized server is run by Amazon Web Services. Does the government want access to the personal data of its citizens by a third country company, for example? Those are questions which are not addressed, hopefully will not have to be addressed, but there are serious implications on cybersecurity level, there's serious implication data protection level and global data protection on global level. So that I just wanted to add to the Schrems II. It is not just the problem of EU.
Thanks a lot, Paulina. And Mary, back to you. You're still on, right? Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay. For a moment, I thought we lost you.
Thank you so much, Sophie and Pavlina. And actually building upon this discussion on interoperability, I would like to turn to Olga and ask her what recommendations the working group came up with regards to, again, international data flows, because well, most of the CE+ countries are not in the EU, and the Schrems case does not directly, and the implications do not directly apply to the countries. So I would like to ask you what recommendations you have, because as the world tries to be more interconnected again, we also need to consider the issue of interoperability of these applications. And related to that also the international data flows.
Yes, thank you, Marie. And this is always the case with our region, because some of the countries are already in the EU, some are still not. Some are more related, to closer to Asia, some are closer to Europe, and that's why we have the whole diversity of countries and the whole diversity of approaches. And probably that's why it is always not so easy to find common solutions for the common challenges that we are facing. But yes, when we were working on the recommendations within the working group, we also touched upon the issue of interoperability, as it is, as both you and Pavlina and Sophie mentioned. This is very important nowadays, and actually the working group put one of the recommendations very specifically, that when designing the apps, both the developers and the governments should be taking into account the interoperability concern, both from the technical and functional point of view. And because, for example, we are not considering that people will be forever locked down within their states, so they will be moving also across the borders, which means that there should be a way to use this tracking functionality, and then this means there also should be the multilingual functionality of these apps, and also so that these apps can be somehow, let's say, communicating between each other and sharing the data. And this is again another question, whether there should be such an app which would be able to let's say, to monitor all of us irrespective of our country, or this is enough to have such apps on the national level. I think there is no specific answer to this question in terms of having a universal app and whether we would need that. Hopefully the crisis will finish faster than we will need to solve this issue. But also I want to point out another recommendation which was made by the working group, and which refers to necessity to actually incorporate the privacy and data protection standards of the highest possible level which currently exists, even if, for example, the country is not party to some specific international document or international treaty. If maybe the national data protection standards are lower than those which are offered by, for example, by GDPR, by other international instruments, then still the governments should try to incorporate those higher standards, because actually they should be they should serve for us as the guiding as the guiding documents, helping us to incorporate the best practices and the highest possible levels of protection and safeguards. This is why I would say that even for our region, it is especially important to try to be guided by these principles.
Thanks a lot, Olga. And unfortunately, it's like I can keep on like for hours this very interesting discussion, but unfortunately we have a time limit, and now it's time to go back to our contributors for the concluding remarks. And so so what are your, I mean, not like ultimately final words, but what is your key takeaways that should be taken into consideration in our fight with COVID, I hope that it will end soon, but looks like we have a lot of time ahead. So I would like to start with Sophie.
Yes, thank you, Ceren. Well, as in all crises, we see the best and the worst of humanity, but I want to keep the best of humanity, because we've seen fantastic reactions of international cooperation and solidarity, and that's only what I want to retain out of it. I also want to point to your attention. I saw that Bogdan and Tony are quite interested in knowing what has been done in which countries. We will be publishing in a month a report, which will be our first report on data protection in our 55 parties to the convention, so it's quite an interesting geographic mix. And because of the particular circumstances this year, it will be a report focusing on digital solutions adopted in the context of the COVID-19, and in particular contact tracing. And so it's a report that will give you an overview of what has been done in the 55 countries. So I think quite interesting to compare and have a more broad approach. So please follow that in 1 month. It will be mid-October that we will release this report. And thank you once again to the organizers and to you for my co-panelists and moderators for the discussion. I think it's challenging times we have, but great results have emerged in this crisis.
Thanks a lot, Sophie. I share your positivity, and hopefully things will get better, and looking forward to reading the report. Now I'd like to go back to Pavlina for her concluding remarks.
Thank you. I can join Sophie in actually thanking the other panelists. And as we go through this crisis, as any digital tool, it highlights the already existing problems. So I hope when we get now the spotlight on the need of data protection on a global level, on the need of cooperation in this area, it would lead to certain agreements or certain standards worldwide, which could be agreed on. I know it's very optimistic. I'm quite aware of that, but it would make the users way more comfortable in how their data is treated. We do have our mapping I talked about on the website. It's called Digital Watch Observatory, and I put the link into the chat. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it interesting. And again, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pavlina. Yes, the messages are quite common, and looking forward for the future work on the privacy-related aspects of COVID. And now I would like to go to Olga for her final remarks.
I want to continue then this tendency, and also to say that I'm very much pleased to be in such a good company today and to discuss these important issues. But also I want to mention one statement which I came across some time ago online, and which is saying due to coronavirus pandemic, we are currently experiencing a shortage of human rights. And this is something which really stayed in my mind till now. And I was thinking about it, that probably this is the reason why it is so important for us, for people from all countries, for people representing different stakeholder groups, to actually come together, to talk together, to discuss together, and to find some common solutions how to actually keep proper protection and safeguards for the human rights. Because if we decide now in this particular COVID-19 crisis that our human rights is something which is not important, then it's just a matter of time until another crisis happens, and until we can totally lose the rights for which we were fighting for centuries. But also on the other hand, I want to say that we can't just close our eyes and resist to the digital transformation, because digital solutions are here. So we should not be talking about the trade-off between having technology or protecting our human rights. We should be able to find a way how to integrate human rights into those digital solutions which are being currently offered and launched, especially in this, especially during this pandemic period. So. So I would say let's be conscious about our human rights, but and also let's keep track of what is happening on the digital solutions realm, so that we are able on time to integrate those two concepts together.
Thanks a lot, Olga. Couldn't agree more. And so not just privacy by design, but human rights by design in all communications technologies is a huge plus for our future, and collaborating, trying to build trust, because maybe we're not on the same parts of the ship all around the world, but we're still facing the same crisis in which technology and the internet helps a lot. And before going back to Mary, I would like to thank again to our wonderful speakers, and I cannot appreciate more that this is an all-female panel and it all happened by accident. And of course, it's like the moment, of course, I don't feel obliged to cheer about this. That's when we know gender equality is achieved, but still, this was such a pleasure. And now going back to Mary.
Thank you very much, Jaren, and thank you very much, Pavlina, Olga, and Sophie for all your contributions. Well, we are almost at the end of the session, and I would just like to remind our participants if they have any last-minute questions to put them in the chat or just raise their hands. And as always, there are SEEDIG messages after every SEEDIG meeting, and it is I would like to say deeply sorry to Alexandra, whom I didn't introduce in the beginning. So now I would like to give the floor to our rapporteur, Alexandra Ivankovic, to share with us the messages from this session. Thank you.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry for this delay. I have some small technical issues.
Mary and Jaren, while the slides are being put on, do we have a chance to react after the presentation by Alexandra or not?
Yes, sure, but then we will share with you the messages later as well. So
okay. Okay.
Okay. These are only initial messages, and you will be able to share your Actually, I think we have time to hear your comments now, but we are looking only for general agreement or disagreement. We were not going to discuss every messages into detail. So the first message is policymakers and developers should take into consideration human rights and interoperability concerns when making policies and developing tracking apps related to COVID-19. You should express your objections in the chat. Okay, we are going to the next one. Provide adequate protection of personal data and inform the public about the efficiency of tracing apps in order to make contact tracing apps useful and efficient. As the previous one, you can express your objections in the chat. Okay, next one. Trust is essential for efficient use of contact tracing apps. Governments should use privacy by design and wide awareness raising campaigns, as well as give citizens option to choose what data they want to share. Okay, next one. Apps should be decentralized and based on Bluetooth technology. Data protection impact assessments should be conducted before the app launch, and multi-stakeholder approach should be used during these processes. Okay, I guess we don't have any objections. These messages will be shared with you through SEEDIG communication channels, and you will be able to express your comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And as Alexandra mentioned, we will share this with the community, and you can, especially our contributors, and you will have the chance to fine-tune the messages. But I think they are okay and recap everything that have been discussed. And going back to our contributors, I would like to give them the floor to make any last-minute comments regarding the messages and in general about the topic that we were discussing. Sophie, you can go first.
No, no, I was checking, but no, I'm fine. I'm fine with the content. There might be just one or two things to add to make it fully in line with what we're preaching. But then I think it's a conversation I will have with Pavlina later on regarding her final statement on the need for privacy and data protection global agreement, which we think exists, which is our convention. So I'd like her rather to tell me why would something else be needed, and if yes, where in the UN, and so how long will it take to get there? So that's really my message, is that any countries, wherever they are in the world, attached to the right to data protection and wanted to protect it, should accede to our convention, because it's open to any country, and we already have Latin American, African, and European ones that have made that commitment.
Thank you, Sophie. Pavlina, would you like to respond to this?
No, absolutely. Leaving the best questions for last, right, Sophie?
Sorry.
Well, the convention, of course, is one of the ways to go, and there is no question about it. As with any other digitally related issues, it is an ongoing discussion which forum it needs to be addressed on, how to provide for actually binding regulations. And that is not only data protection, that is across the board. That is cybersecurity. We see those talks at the UN. That is data localization, for example, discussions at last time in Japan. So I was alluding to the broader context of actually needing some kind of baseline, and that is across the board. It's not only the data protection.
Okay.
And also, you know, for me, always the differences between the countries, the cultural differences between the countries, how the privacy is perceived, what is considered to be private information, how it is treated, and how it is culturally acceptable to be treated, is also something which is in development. Let me put it that way. It is not a legal question. It is something in development where, of course, we can see it on the example of GDPR. The European Union does have an influence on how that is treated elsewhere in the world. So but yeah, good question, Sophie. Thank you. It's the end with no answers, unfortunately, so far, but we'll try.
Thank you, Sophie and Pavlina. Indeed, a very important and interesting question. And speaking of diversity, I would like to go back to Olga, as she mentioned that C+ is actually very diverse in many senses, including cultural and legal traditions. So any last comment on this question, Olga?
Yes, the last one, I want to make an action point and to actually ask everyone to please go and check our recommendations. Please read them, and please help us disseminating them in your countries, among your professional networks, because there is a huge work behind these recommendations, and we would appreciate a lot if it eventually reaches the decision and policymakers who could benefit from them, because if they benefit from them, at the end the whole society and each of us as the individual benefits from them, because they create the reality, the environment in which we are living. And on that note, again, many thanks to you, Mary and Sharon, and to Pavlina and Sophie for this discussion, and also many thanks to Mary and my colleague on the executive committee, Sarah, who were co-leading with me this intersessional project on tracking apps. And I also see some members of the working group among participants today. So many thanks to all of you, and I hope by working together we can achieve very good results.
Thank you, Olga. I also would like to join you in thanking and really appreciating all the work our working group did during summertime, actually, which is remarkable to me, especially this year, because we've been working nonstop. That is my feeling, at least. So Once again, thank you very much, Olga, Pavlina, and Sophie. And I would like also to thank very much my co-moderator, Jeren, and also our rapporteur, Alexandra, for their contribution. I hope our participants and those who joined us through social media live stream also found the discussion useful. I personally found it very interesting, thought-provoking. So really looking forward to working more in the field regarding for protecting our privacy and data protection, taking it to the next level, hopefully together. Also taking this opportunity, I would like to remind everyone that next on SEEDIG 6 agenda is the SEE talk on the roadmap for digital cooperation. So I hope to see many of you there, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Hope to meet again in person soon.
Bye.